most authentic voice in true crime. I see Victoria is here. Message retracted. Hello, everyone from Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Chrissy Lee. I missed the last live, so I'm very excited and thankful that I'm here. Well, we're also thankful that you're here. Stephanie, good to see you here. I don't know if you can hear, I'm slightly out of breath. Can you guys hear me okay? I bet Nick's having technical issues, or Timmy and Ivy have tied him up, yeah. Greetings from London. Hello, Victoria. Hello, Sherry Claiborne. Debbie Weaki. How do I say that? That's good. Thanks. I'm glad that you can hear me okay. Yvonne Robinson. Hello. Stacy. Loris Warenko, good to see you. Melvin Royan, are you from PE? Okay. Ground zero, or kind of a hotspot there, isn't it, in terms of corona? Ann Chapman, hello from Florida. Shay Wolf, hi. Carly Power, hello from Manchester, England. How's Manchester? Steph, hello, Nick. I saw your comment in the community section. Sorry I didn't say hello there, but hello now. Lisa, hi Nick and everyone. Hi Lisa. Tracy, lots of hearts there. Thank you very much. Debbie, we are key. Okay, got it. Okay. Chrissy Lee, hey. Paula Edwards, greetings from a very mild, I think that was UK. It just jumped up to the top. Bling is the new black. Howdy from Dallas. Katie Hodson, hi from Australia, exclamation mark, big smile. The animals are here. They're just playing. I'll introduce them to you in a moment. Richen, hi from Sweden. Hello from Massachusetts. Kiyu, good to see you. Okay. So I'll kind of come back to you guys as you guys come in. Laura R, hello from Argentina. Christopher Johnson, Idaho. Okay. Anyone else? Rachel Kropinski. Hi, Nick from Canada. Okay. Good to have you all here. I think I'm going to just start off by telling you guys a little bit about an incident that happened to my father. I guess I can say it's kind of funny because he chuckled while he was telling it to me. Basically, he was on the farm, and I've seen this nyala many times myself. I've felt very skittish around it. As soon as you approach this antelope, his hairs literally go up on the back of his neck, not only the back of his neck, but his entire rear, ending in his tail. And I've actually got video of him sort of walking very, very carefully, kind of a very dainty walk, but he's kind of gearing up to take you out, right? And what was kind of Kathy Balelo from Connecticut, Carol Field, you're a regular here from Scotland, Nicole Boutelier. Thanks, Carol. Hey, you. Hey, thanks a lot. Janae Ann, hi, Nick and the peeps. Wendy Ward. Anyway, so what happened was my father was there, and this animal, which is definitely not right in his head. He is struggling to procreate. There is a female there. The female kind of hops over the fence almost every night, goes somewhere else, and then comes back the next day. It knows where it gets its food, the female, but certainly doesn't get anything else, doesn't get any satisfaction, if you get what I'm going. Anyway, thanks a lot, Q. Congrats with the 31,500 subs. And anyway, so my father's on the farm. He turned his back on this animal. We just lost focus, and the next thing, the nyala hit him really hard. He actually sent a photo to me where you can see it broke the skin of his thigh, even though he had trousers on and a wallet between the horn and the impact. And obviously it's absolutely blue, kind of a black purple blue around that impact zone, and he obviously flew through the air. You know, my dad's a senior fellow. Hey. And so he was sitting there on the ground with this Nyala facing him, thinking, in a serious way, thinking that he could die. And so he had the wind knocked out of him. He was sort of trying to gesture to the guy who was working in the garden, who was working with the weed eater, and the guy couldn't hear him because it was like bzzz, and he was trying to get this guy's attention, but he sort of couldn't speak. And it was like, it felt like his life flashing in front of his eyes and kind of thing. And he said he really thought that if this thing had to charge him now, with him sitting on the ground, you know, his horns facing forward, head down, you know, he could die. And people have died from Nyala attacks before. A woman had her artery punctured in her leg by the horn of a Nyala and bled to death. So anyway, long story short, eventually the gardener sort of turned, and then he sort of came running with a little stick. And my father had to send him back to, you know, fetch the weed eater, and then sort of got rid of him. But what is looking like is probably going to happen is we don't know. A Nyala is a kind of an antelope. If you look at the previous video I put up on YouTube, it's the animal right at the end of that. You will see the one horn, the end of the horn's already sort of damaged. Is that antelope's already punctured a Land Rover tire by, you know, doing all that kind of thing. Maria Newcomb, hi from Vancouver. Ruth Long, love your voice. Thank you. You love the most authentic voice in true crime. Okay. Firefly says, I fall asleep to his voice. I'm not sure. I guess that's, you know, each to his own. Sakura Girl says, saw the picture. So you can see it's quite a big antelope. It's quite a big adversary. Debbie Wiakia says, glad your dad is okay. Okay. Paul Morgan from Scotland. He is okay now. The question is what's going to happen in future. You know, isn't going to happen again kind of thing. So I wanted to tell you about that. Just something else I just wanted to share very quickly, just because I found it quite interesting. It's not really true crime related. Is there anyone here from Texas, you know, that endured this incredibly cold weather recently? So the Financial Times actually did a graphic that explains how that cold weather comes about. And it's quite interesting. If you imagine a poached egg, you know, a poached egg is sort of a round, it's sort of kept in a circular thing, as far as I can remember. And Steph says, I'm from the south. Okay. And so that is usually how the jet stream circles around the polar vortex. It sort of goes around fast enough that it actually keeps the polar vortex where it needs to be. And there's a strong differential between the cold polar vortex air and the warmer air that surrounds it, right? Now, apparently, when that differential is not very strong and this poached egg polar vortex becomes more erratic in shape, becomes almost like a scrambled egg, almost becomes like just more wavy. It's not so much a circular shape, it's more wavy. Then what happens is the polar vortex leaks through, or it's almost like a dam wall that sort of breaks. The what do they call them? There's very high altitude winds. I had it written somewhere. The jet stream. The jet stream gets a little bit too weak to hold back this polar vortex, and then it breaks through there. So that is why you have these frigid conditions spooling so far south. Does that make sense? Carol asks, how cold is it in Texas? Do you ever get polar vortexes in Scotland? I would imagine. DN said we had people go without water and electricity for 3 days. I'm safe and warm. Well, that's good to hear. I've been seeing reports of children freezing to death. It's very upsetting. I'm listening from Tennessee. That's Deborah Ferris. Okay, so I don't know how much time we have. I want to take some of your questions before I deal with the covert narcissism thing. That's not going to take too long, although depending on your questions. I have prepared just a couple of, what do you call it, primers, I guess, just to deal with this, just to have it at the top of my head. So I'm going to quickly deal with some of your questions, starting off with, where am I going to find them? I think the first one's here. So this is dealing with the 4 guys who do the body language analysis, and I think they were doing it on Chris Watts. I never watched the full thing. I did watch some of it. And one of my patrons responded to it and said, this is a quote, she said, this was disappointing analysis to watch. They describe his, quote, malignant narcissistic traits. He doesn't have any feelings, a robot with adaptive skills. Has me questioning, how do so many experts come to the same conclusion? She goes on to say, I think what somebody says is way more important than body language. Body language is inaccurate. Some people have a natural affinity to feel guilty when they are not, but with words, the brain has a tendency to tell on you. So I thought that was very well said. There's some people that think that this group of experts are fantastic. I generally like them. I enjoy their content, but I think there's a difference between being a body language expert and then knowing the facts of the case and being able to read body language. I think there's a bit of a difference. What I mean is you can just do body language on its own and you might be quite good, but if you don't know the circumstances inside out, if you don't know the context, and I'm not sure if it counts for very much. And that's what certainly a lot of my patrons have highlighted, also something that I've highlighted. But what is interesting is that, and that comes up in the next comment also by someone on Patreon, is that all 4 of them thought of Chris Watts as a narcissist, right? So body language can be inaccurate on its own. So if you're just looking at body language on its own, someone might be thinking about something else. They might be, you don't really know what's going on in their mind. And the only way to know what is going on in their mind is to get to know them really, really well and to establish a baseline, which we'll talk about in a moment. You can't establish a baseline in that moment of crisis. The best way to establish a baseline is to try and find material where they are not being interviewed, and that's almost impossible to get. To some extent, you get a little bit of baseline from Chris Watts when he's at home, but I don't think it's really sufficient. It's tiny little pieces here and there. In a weird way, you get the best baseline via third parties, via people like the LIVESTREAMs and so on. So that was just dealing with the first question. This one is from, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say his name, so I'll just give part of his name. His name's Sylvester. He was saying, these experts are fantastic. I tend to really enjoy a lot of their content. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but because he sort of talks about, okay, you really like that. And he says that Watts' nervous behaviors are what he called anticipatory. Then this is the part that is quite interesting, what Sylvester wrote. He wrote, they all 4 believe he's a psychopath, and the only problem I have with that is why was he so difficult to identify as one by those around him the most? That's quite a good point. If Chris Watts was a psychopath, why didn't anyone feel that about him before the crime? So why didn't his sibling or his in-laws, why didn't they sort of go, wow, this guy doesn't have any feelings? Why didn't that come up, before the time? Then the other thing that he said is, I do agree there are times with Watts where he does seem to lack feeling. I think we can all agree with that, right? And as if he's mimicking how feeling ought to look, as if he's mimicking how feeling, so I think that should be ought to look, especially during his relationship talk, but I don't totally get the label psychopath. To me, psychopath has sort of passed its sell-by date. It used to be used all the time if there was a crime. I think Jodi Arias was called a psychopath. Now the go-to term is narcissist. Carol Power. Okay, that's something else. Okay, so another comment that was left was, I think what somebody says is way more important than body language. What somebody says is way more important than body language. I think that that's quite an interesting point, but I think you've got to balance the two. I don't think body language is absolutely unimportant, and I don't think what someone says is unimportant. I think they're both important. And I wouldn't necessarily say what someone says is more important than body language. It can be. I think there are definitely instances where it can be. And I think there are instances where body language is more important than what is being said. For example, so often you see someone saying something with emphasis and they're shaking their heads. That is speaking volumes. So what they're saying matters because they're shaking their head, meaning they are potentially contradicting what they're saying. So as far as I'm concerned, just going through a lot of cases, I've found it's important to pay attention to both. But of course, you're only going to know really how extremely relevant the body language is if you know the case inside out. If you don't know the case inside out, and this was something that I found with one of the creators dealing with Burke Ramsey, something might be off, but you don't know why, right? Someone said, in my opinion, body language and actions they all matter. One person may be able to control one tool, but not another. Coat of Many Colors says, but how can he wipe out his entire family and seemingly not be bothered about it at all? This comes up quite often. I should maybe deal with it right here. Just not sure where I've written about it. So I guess the way to deal with that question, so if you say, how could he do what he did and show no emotion? And I think it was incredible to all of us on this when he did the sermon on the porch that he seemed, to me, he seemed relieved. To me, he seemed almost cheerful. He seemed to be chuckling. He seemed quite lighthearted. There didn't seem to be an immediate darkness. Nicole Kessinger said she saw darkness in his eyes, but I sort of wonder how much of that is not projecting. I mean, some of that might be true, but especially the way that he was with her, something might have been missing. But I think to the rest of us, you've kind of got to wonder, was something missing, And, I think 2 years later, you've sort of got to look at it and say, don't we know him by now? Don't we have an idea of who he is by now? And so this is my response to that, and it's the same thing that I've seen in many other cases. Another example is Scott Peterson. Is basically when you have a premeditated murder, then all of that emotional tension is dealt with before the crime, right? There may even be some anticipation of how to answer questions. There may be some rehearsal and preparation for how to come up with a story ahead of time. And so I'm just saying the reason why you have this seemingly flat effect is part of the act. It is, I'm nonchalant, I don't know what's going on. So that is part of the act. The fact that we know that what happened, that's different. But what he's assuming is that you'll never know that. And so he's assuming that the nonchalant act is going to work. And I think it sort of did with some people. Has Chris Watts had an evaluation in prison? I think that came up and he was asked if he wanted to be evaluated, and I think he didn't want to be. So the premeditation is how you get yourself up to speed as a criminal, where you're able to deal with those things. Does that make sense? Okay, I think I must go back to... I just want the spanners that are out there, or the folks dealing with the comments, just if you come across some very insulting things to certain people, please just remove them. Angel 555, thank you, Nick, for your hard work. I appreciate that. Here is Timmy, by the way. She's just saying hello. Hello, Timmy. Can I carry on, Timmy? Hey, can I carry on? Okay. What a beautiful little face, hey? So I took Timmy for a walk in an unusual location today. I actually went with a friend, and I think he's very happy today just because there were lots of new dogs, lots of new smells. And yeah, I think it was a really nice evening. It is starting to get cooler here. Doesn't feel like that right now in this room, but it certainly is getting cooler. Corin Levy says, but how is Ivy? I've actually taken her little ting-a-ling chain off, otherwise you hear it constantly, but she is very well. I did put a video up of the two of them going at it. Some people were upset, thinking that Ivy was being bullied or whatever, but Ivy really, Timmy's a very gentle dog, and although there certainly are times where you look at him and you think, wow, okay, that's enough, kind of thing. So there is some intervention that is going on. Okay, so just another question. I just want to quickly go through your questions so that I can deal with the covert narcissism stuff. Another one. I'm not quite sure who left this, but someone said, question I have about Chris Watts and his psychology. Oh, I think this was Stephanie. In your most recent YouTube video about Chris Watts' psychology, you make an excellent point. You didn't know what a divorce with Shanann would look like, but Nutgate and the reactions to the feelings he did share, for example, being scared to death about having a third baby, left little to the imagination. I agree with your thoughts on him being scared and afraid of the realization of what a divorce would look like then. He likely did fantasize about a different life and what murdering his family would be like. My question is, now that Chris Watts knows what murdering his wife and children looks like and how he looks, far from a good man in the eyes of many, do you think he would have committed the murder of his family? So now that he knows what it's like, do you think he would have done it? I think that's a difficult question because you're sort of talking about time travel. You know, in other words, if Chris Watts could right now time travel back in time, you know, would he just do everything the way that he did? I think if you have to take that literally, the answer is probably no. But I think another possibility is that he might have said, okay, the mistakes I made were the cell phone. I should have done, maybe would have done it again and tried to do it differently. Who knows? I think the more realistic answer to that question is that he did think about, so I think when he premeditated the crime, I think he did imagine, what if I get caught? And remember, there was a time where he was being interrogated where he wasn't being caught yet, where it was still like, what's going to happen kind of thing. And Agent Coder said, what do you think should happen to someone who did hurt your children, remember? And Watts said, well, life in prison or maybe the death penalty. So he had to have thought about that. I just think that he backed himself And I think on the one hand, I think his fantasy, the premeditation, I think he thought, wow, I can definitely do this and get away with this. And on the other hand, I think he didn't think about the negative side. So if there were two wolves, the one wolf saying, do it, do it, do it, do it, you can have this great life with Nicole Kessinger. You can outsmart all these people. You've been outsmarting them all along. And this other wolf was saying, don't do it. It's wrong. You're going to get caught. Well, this wolf out howled or out wolfed this wolf, right? Does that make sense? So I think that he did think about the consequences, but he was more interested and more invested in. And I think the thing that I think we're all missing here is he's not thinking straight. He's caught up in an affair. He's in a state of addiction. He's in a state of sleep deprivation. He's in a state of panic. He's in a state of urgency. He's in a time-starved situation. And the walls are moving in, and he's trying to escape the situation that he's in. And that was what he was trying to do, and that was why he did what he did. I don't know if that answers your question sufficiently. Then, is it Raquel Via? This was left in the community section of the YouTube True Crime Rocket Science page. I'd really like you to go in-depth analysis of how could Chris Watts possibly have thought he'd get away with it, and what was going to happen, and how he wanted it to play out. So first of all, I actually made notes here, and I just don't quite know what's happened to them. I don't know if I left them on the table or what, but I just don't see them here. Yeah, I don't quite see them here, I'm afraid. Unfortunately, yeah. Okay, so the thing to address there with how could he possibly have thought he'd get away with it? Well, again, it's got to do with premeditation. So he planned it, and he planned to get away with it. And I think the proper way to answer that question, just beyond that, but beyond saying, well, it was because he premeditated it, that's the answer, is he tried to disguise it in a work day. So if you were watching the Chris Watts's day, what do you call it, play out from a helicopter or a drone or something, you would just see things looking quite normal, except for the fact that he was going to the well site first, right? But I'm just saying, if you were watching it from a distance, you would kind of get the sense, well, he's just going to work, right? If someone said, okay, sit in the chopper next to me, what do you think's going on here? From a great distance, you wouldn't really know that anything was going on. And that is what he's trying to do, is trying to hide a horrible crime inside a typical work day. Well, I just went to work, kind of thing. So that's how he thought he could get away with it. The other thing is, I don't think he expected Nicole Atkinson to get involved. I don't think he expected her to be so inquisitive. You know, she went up to the door, her son ran round the house, her son looked through the window, got into the trunk of her car, she even moved her car closer, looked through the little windows. They even drove to the doctor where Shanann was supposed to have a doctor's appointment. And how could Chris Watts have anticipated that? So he didn't think that was going to happen. So I think Chris Watts maybe assumed that Shanann didn't have very many good friends, but he was mistaken, wasn't he? What do you think was going to happen? I think he thought time was going to go by. I think he thought that as more time went by, they might think that this was Shanann acting up. This was Shanann like Nutgate. This was Shanann basically saying, I've had it with you, being upset and, running off with the kids, and perhaps something had happened. And that wouldn't be, that part of the story wouldn't be up to him. They had an argument, she left, well, he didn't need to know anything beyond that. And he thought that would be enough of an explanation. Now, on the one hand, it seems crazy that he would make up such a silly story. But on the other hand, if you look at Casey Anthony and Scott Peterson, their stories are also very, very simple, and yet it got them quite far. If you think about Scott Peterson, his story was that Lacey went for a walk. And there's still, even today, there's quite a lot of conjecture, maybe she did. If you take the John Benet Ramsey case, you might say the ransom note is crazy, it's silly, and yet it's still part of the narrative that there was an intruder today. So you can have a very silly story, but if you can kind of back it up, then it can actually go a long way. With Casey Anthony, there was Zanny the Nanny, and that story went some way as well, ultimately nowhere. So that's what he thought was going to happen. And maybe it's difficult to say, maybe how he wanted it to play out was he was going to stage things from Shanann's phone. I get the feeling that he's quite phone savvy, Nicole Kessinger as well in a way. But I mean, I think he's quite phone savvy in how he used the secret calculator app, but also we know that he was already staging calls on the morning, like hours after burying his family. He was already staging texts and staging calls. So I don't see any reason why that wouldn't have continued. And so if Nicholas Atkinson didn't find Shanann's phone when he did, which was somewhere like 2:20 that afternoon, very early on, but if he didn't find her phone, possibly Chris Watts could have continued to stage things from her phone, for example, on Facebook, saying, please leave me alone. And that would make it seem like, wow, she is okay, kind of thing. And I think some of that does seem to have been happening in a Suzanne Morphew case, staging via Facebook. And so you say, how did he want it to play out? Well, how I think he wanted it to play out is a lot like in the Patrick Frazee case, which is that they search and they search, they don't find her, and it's sort of, well, there's not enough evidence. And if a mistress doesn't come forward, well, there's just not enough to go on with. There's not enough to prosecute this case. Okay, does that answer your question? Do you think Chris Watts was pretending not to know the password to Shanann's phone? I've certainly gone both ways with that. I think there are times where I've thought that he didn't know it, but ultimately I think that he did know it. I think that he did know it. If he didn't know it, then I think he nevertheless had access to her iCloud, which, I think he did know the password because of the way that he could ramble off all these other passwords when he was interrogated by Code, and also because he's the kind of guy who remembers things like that. He remembered the well site names. They called him Rain Man. So I personally believe that he did know it. I feel the same way about the bank accounts, that he did know the username. I think he said he had the password to the bank accounts, but not the username, which to me doesn't make much sense. Isn't it true? Okay. Some people are talking about cats here. Hello, I'm new to your channel. Love this channel. Good to hear. Okay, are you guys ready to hear about covert narcissism? Natalie says, if he knew the password, he could have thrown Nicole Atkinson off. So someone left a comment not long ago, I think on my previous video, just saying, why did he murder the kids? Like saying that they can understand to some extent, as bad as it was, but they can understand him murdering his wife. But why the kids? They just don't understand that. They'll never understand it. I'm going to give you a very basic answer to that. I think there's a broad answer, and then where you can refer to the evidence. There's Timmy again, is like, what you're doing, you know. What's this, Timmy? Timmy, can I carry on? Where's Ivy? Hey, where's Ivy? Okay, so you can like go through the discovery and you can look at some of the very specific things that are going on. But I think the answer to why did he murder the kids is he felt no connection to them. You could say that that's psychopathy or whatever, but I think that was sort of what happened, where in a way he was no longer invested in the family. Even when they were happily married, I don't think he had much of a say. Did he have much of a say where they went to school? So he was already going with the flow before they were born, and then when they were born, he was sort of a side character. And maybe he wanted a boy so that he could do things that were only, can you get to me a deerstalker hat? Yeah, good one. So, and Ivy could be Watson. Yeah, that's true. Annie Thomas says he hated doing the laundry. I must say, Plunder put up an excellent video that I think I tried to find subsequently and it was taken down. But that just shows that dynamic that we're sort of talking about. And a lot of people don't want to see that or talk about it because it doesn't show Shanann in a great light. And so we'd rather not see that at all than acknowledge what is going on. So the recovering Hanbot says, how could he disconnect from the kids? I do not see how that could happen. So to answer that, first of all, it's a good question. How could he disconnect from the kids? Well, the one way is that, and I'm sort of explaining that, the one way is that he has an affair. I think no matter which father in a marriage is doing this, having an affair, you're going to be focused on somebody else, right? And that is going to create a disconnect. Now, with Chris Watts, it wasn't just a little disconnect. He was very obsessed, very desperately in love with Kissinger. And because people are so focused on hating Nicole Kissinger, they don't sort of recognize that he probably loved her and she may have loved him, that there was actually quite a strong bond developing between them, that they listened to one another, they connected with one another. There was quite a wholesome relationship developing between them that was quite new, I think, for both of them. But the point is that transactionally, you had the shift from Chris Watts to Nicole Kissinger and away from his family, including his children. So the affair is what drew him almost completely into it. He wanted a new life, and the new life meant, I just want to be with this person. And I think when he was with his children on that last weekend and he felt like, I really don't want to be with them. I don't want to deal with their nonsense. I don't want to deal with this or that thing. It's no longer cute to me. What I want more than anything in the world is to be with this other person. And that is the extent to which that addiction was taking over him. So the other way that the connection was broken was by the 5 weeks that they weren't there. It wasn't though he was having an affair and they were right there. He would see them every day. And I think the basic way to answer it is he felt a much stronger connection to Kissinger. He felt a much stronger connection, connecting to her. At the same time, he was disconnecting from his family. And you can kind of feel it when they're at Myrtle Beach, where He's sort of holding their hands, and he's just come back from the Great Sand Dunes. Like literally, he was there a few days ago, and now he's on the beach, sort of holding a little girl's hand, and it's a lot less fun. He's sort of saddled with all the chores and stuff, and it's suddenly like, wow, this isn't fun. I'm not free, and obviously I'm not saying he's entitled to feel that way. He signed up to be married. He signed up for the third pregnancy, but he ended up just feeling, wow, I don't want this. And that feeling grew stronger and stronger and stronger. I'm not entertained by my children. I'm not finding this fun. And especially with this another child coming along, I really don't want this. But there were other aspects as well, them throwing chicken nuggets at him. The thing that Nicole Kissinger said about Shanann would say horrible things and then they would repeat it. And then I think, I can just imagine it with my puppy, and I can imagine it's totally different. It's got far more levels with people. And obviously, you treat people better than you treat animals. But funny enough, I don't think it's always that way. But, you put so much time and love and care into a puppy, and then you go onto a field and there's another dog there, and then he doesn't listen to you. He just ignores you, and you feel kind of humiliated and maybe a little bit resentful that, wow, you're just doing whatever you want and I do so much for you. I must say, Timmy has become a very good little dog, just in terms of, even if there are other dogs and I call him, he'll come to me. And I find that quite validating. There were obviously times when he was a puppy when he wouldn't do that, where he just does whatever he wants. It's quite nice when he seems to say, wow, I'm going to be with you, even though I could be with these other dogs. So Olivia Vast, #1 fan. Woohoo! Thanks very much. I like that jumping. Is it a pineapple with a hairband on? #1 fan. Thanks, Olivia. From Australia, $14.99. Thank you very much. Should I get started with the covert narcissism thing, or any other questions? Have you ever thought of trying Thrive for the research aspect? Not really. I have in the past used, I think it's called Formula 2000. It's just a caffeine supplement. So I have used things that accelerate your metabolism, and I have felt sick, and I have felt that I maybe lose weight, but sort of at the cost of your well-being and other things. Steph says, let's do it. Okay. In spite of, because of, yes, please. Okay. Let's just look at a couple of more. Potato, I sold, timeshare. I drink Slim Fast with goat's milk. Okay. I do sometimes take meal replacements, but I actually need to Google it to make sure it doesn't damage your kidneys, because often there's a lot of intense, what do they call it? Just too much, I can't think of the words. There's too much what is in the product. And so when it goes to your kidneys, it can damage them. Yes, palpitations, definitely. Okay, so I'm going to take you through 8 key aspects of covert narcissism, right? I've got all these little papers here. So these are the 8 traits of a covert narcissist. And we're going to look at how many Chris Watts meets those traits. Now, you're welcome to write these down. You're welcome to think about them in your mind, whatever. Probably would work if you write them down, make a list of the 8 of them and tick which ones you think match Chris Watts. This is something that I got from a website. So you could say, actually, there are 20 traits, or they're actually only 5 or whatever. But I think you'll agree as we go through them that these 8 are basically classic covert narcissism traits. So it's giving a broad idea. I also just want to say that the idea for this episode, for this live, came about when I was looking at another channel and I was listening to someone who was being put forward as an expert, adamantly saying he's a covert narcissist again and again and again, giving all these fantastic examples, and I was sort of listening to it just as in almost in an offhand way, going, well, I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that. That's only half true. What about that? What about that? And I got more and more agitated just listening to it. Someone says, if Chris Watts is a psychopath or malignant narcissist, could he really be in love with Kissinger or anyone at all? Yeah, well, that's a different line of reasoning. You could say Chris Watts is a that, and so I'm not going to put any value into his relationship, and so I don't know why he committed the crime. That tends to be something I see quite often. Let's put a label on the criminal, and then that's who he is, but I don't understand why he did this. That's what you get with the label. That's what you get with the wrong label as well. Victoria, thank you for your excellent work. Thank you very much. Always good to see you, Victoria. 100. Great. Okay. Annie Thomas, many psychopaths are married. Okay. Okay, so let's start with the first one. You guys ready? Carol Fuel. I got to go, but believe me, having just split with one. Okay. Okay, so the first one, and let me show you, is this one. Can you see it? The first one is reserved or self-effacing attitude, right? And you might disagree with me. I don't think you will, but I've said I agree with that. I agree that Chris Watts is a reserved guy. So in the covert narcissism boxes that we're going to tick off, the very first one, you can tick it off. He is reserved and self-effacing. We can go through. The Lindstrom said that. The Shanann's parents said that he was quite a reserved guy. The Thayers said that. Trinastich, when he was talking to Coonrod, said the same thing, said this guy is never this talkative. Nicole Atkinson described Chris Watts in that way. Luke Eppel described him as an introvert. Nicole Kessinger described him as an introvert. And so when you're describing Chris Watts as reserved, I think it's the same as the description you give for an introvert. It's the same thing. Yes, he's shy, he's an introvert. So the first point basically goes to covert narcissism, right? Okay, do you agree? Good point. Rachel Kropinski says, what if this list shows I'm a narcissist? Okay. Well, I don't think you're going to find that you a covert narcissist, Rachel. Debbie McClellan, Lol Nurse Bev, okay, Mystery Baker. He describes himself that way. That's true. That's a great point. That's perhaps one of the best points on that is Chris Watts himself describes himself as reserved. So there we have it. Okay, so the next one is number 2, humility or tendency to put themselves down, right? And I also think that is what Chris Watts is, right? So the points 1 and 2 are par for the course. He's a covert narcissist, right? There we go. Okay. But I would also say that both those traits are the same as an introvert. An introvert is kind of humble in the sense that he's shy and is reserved. But bear in mind, this is about being self-effacing, right? Self-effacing means that you sort of let someone else get ahead of you. Do you know what I mean? Self-effacing is, I'm just trying to think of examples of, I think self-effacing is when Chris Watts had that thing hit him in the face, that pie kind of toy. That is Chris Watts being self-effacing. Where Chris Watts sort of allows Shanann to go ahead with a pregnancy, sorry, not the pregnancy, the gender reveal. He's being self-effacing, although I think that self-effacing would lead to something not very good, because I think he decided I can't let that down. Put yourself down, yes, okay. And yes, there it is, putting yourself down. Okay. So now we get to one that I don't think I agree with, but maybe you disagree. That's this one. Number 3, smugness or quiet superiority. Okay. I don't get the sense that Chris Watts is smug, and when he, and I think a good example of, is he smug and is there quiet superiority? Well, if you look at the Sermon on the Porch, is that an example of that? And I think some people, especially the people who really hate Chris Watts, would say, absolutely, that's an example of Chris Watts being smug. That's him being quietly superior. I don't see that though. I don't think he's trying to show that he's cleverer than anyone. I think he's quite worried. I also think the polygraph, I don't think he's trying to be superior there. I think he's trying to just show that he is trying to be nonchalant and he's trying to seem as though he's got nothing to worry about. I don't think it's smug. I also didn't get a sense of the quiet superiority or smugness at the, when he's standing next to the Narcissist television, right? What do you guys think about that? Someone says covert smugness. I don't think the smugness is overt, and I don't think it's covert. I just think it's, you can kind of see it, and I can't say I really see it with Chris Watts. I don't think, you know, for me, one of the best examples is Chris Watts at the sentencing hearing. Does he seem smug at the sentencing hearing? Is it smug to admit to your crimes? Do you have quiet superiority when you sign a plea deal and then you go to jail? I don't know. I don't see that. What did I write here? Quiet superiority. I mean, is he feeling superior? I don't get the feeling that sort of, if you took the camera away, or if Shanann was doing a Thrive video and then you turn the camera off, if immediately Chris Watts is suddenly going to be superior. I don't get that sense at all. Instead, I get the sense that he, in a way, seems to feel inferior, in a way that he seems to suffer from a lack of self-esteem, that he seems to lack self-confidence, not that he has this hidden self-confidence. You know, where Chris Watts is being spoken to by Coonrod, and Coonrod in front of Trinastich, and he's sort of folding his arms, and he just doesn't seem very sure of himself. And I don't get the sense that he's smug or that there's quiet superiority. Now, you've got to be careful. There's duping delight, and there's that sense of, I know something that you don't know, and you could say that is smug. But I'm talking about, is he smug generally? Does he sort of walk around and he's smug? He sort of walks around and is the smug guy. Half Rutter, thank you very much. $5 just because you're great. Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Wow. That brought a smile to my face. Camille Kokagna. Am I saying it right? Kokagna. $25. Wow. Thanks very much. What do you guys think about that quiet superiority? Do you think he is showing quiet superiority? Now, if I to take myself, you know, a lot of the time I'm trying to convey what I believe about something. And if I'm speaking to someone who respects me and who is listening or something, then I might feel that we're just on the same level. But if I'm speaking to someone who doesn't know anything about this case, for example, the Watts case, and starts someone sent me a message, I think on Instagram, talking about ghosts. Do I think that could be happening? Just instantly I would get a feeling of quiet superiority, that, okay, I don't think that this is true, right? I don't know if I would go as far as being smug, but I think I would just have a sense of quiet superiority. Do you get what I'm saying? So it's a little bit of a difficult one to look at, but I don't look at Chris Watts on the Sermon on the Porch seeming to be superior. And I don't get a sense of him being smug, but you might disagree with me. So far, I've got 2 out of the 3 that support him being a covert narcissist. How about you guys? In spite of, because says, if he had superiority, he would have been able to get a divorce and would have. I agree with that. I think he committed the crime not because he felt superior, but because he felt inferior. Not because he felt, I mean, I think that's actually pretty well put. Okay, so that is number 3. I think the other thing, just to think about this thing about quiet superiority, is the interview on February the 18th. I thought he was quite sincere there, not 100% sincere, and I don't think he told the absolute truth. But isn't telling, if he was smug, couldn't he have just said, go to hell, I'm not going to talk to you. You've come all the way here. You want to talk to me? Sorry, I'm not going to talk to you. You could say, well, he's going to have quiet superiority instead of that. Well, at turns, he seemed to be quite in pain. He seemed to be quite, not crying, but emotional, where he says, these are my kids, remember? I do think that there is some emotion there in the same way that introverts have emotion. I also think it's emotion that is mixed up with deceit, and that is what makes it so difficult. Okay, so let's go to the next one. Anne says, not a narcissist, but definitely had a mental illness. Okay, I don't think that's the case either. And that's what brings us to this one. Number 4. Can you see it? Passive-aggressive behavior, right? And what I've said here is, yes, in the crime is passive-aggressive. So in other words, the crime is take the kids to a birthday party, you're coming home from your flight, sorry, I fell asleep on the couch. It's passive in that sense. And I believe the way that he attacked Shanann was very aggressive, but very stealthy. It was a stealth attack from behind. And if you take Chris Watts being this reserved guy, this shy guy, this guy who doesn't say much, I think the crime itself was aggressive. Now, I think a lot of other people will say, I'm sure they argued. They argued and then he did something. I don't think that happened. Why? Because I think he's passive and he's introverted and he doesn't want a confrontation. And that includes murder. Even though he wants to commit a murder, he doesn't want to. He doesn't want that confrontation. So then you say, how can you commit a non-confrontational murder? And that was the key for me to solving this case before even the discovery came out. So it was, this is a non-confrontational guy. How would he commit a non-confrontational murder? And the answer is, well, you wouldn't shed any blood. There wouldn't be unnecessary pain. There wouldn't be a sadistic element like that, an overtly sadistic element. Yes, he fears confrontation. Well said. Gone Primetime says drugged her. He drugged her to get rid of the child. So bear in mind, his first way of, a lot of people just think he just killed his family, right? When I say just, I'm not trying to minimize it. I'm just saying that's limiting what he was doing. He just annihilated his family. But the fact is, Olga M., thank you for your excellent analysis. Thank you for 20 pounds. Thank you very much. Thanks, Olga. The fact is that sure, now I've just been thrown for a loop. The fact is that the way the crime started was he wanted to bring about a miscarriage. And so theoretically, if he had been able to do that, then it would have stopped there. So in other words, if Shanann had lost the baby, probably she'd still be alive today, and the children would also be alive today. So that was what he was trying to do. That was number one for him, is trying to stop the pregnancy. When he failed at that, and this is where you can say his thinking is really dodgy, is that he went from, okay, I can't kill the unborn child the way that I've been trying to. Now I'm going to kill Shanann to kill the unborn child. And then from there, well, if I'm killing Shanann, who's going to look after the kids? How are the kids going to deal with this? I don't know if he thought that far. I think he may have just thought, I can't afford all of this. I think that just became the muddiness of his thinking. I do think we're giving him far too much credit for being an intelligent person, to be quite honest. So the whole passive-aggressive thing, I would say the crime is passive-aggressive, but Chris Watts himself, not so much. And I'm not saying he's not passive-aggressive at all. Anne King, thanks very much. Love TCRS, best analysis ever. Thank you very much. Stephanie also says thank you. Thank you, Stephanie, for keeping everything nice and tidy here. So do you follow what I'm saying, that the crime is passive-aggressive? But I don't get the sense that Chris Watts is passive-aggressive. And what I mean by that is you don't get the sense that here he loses his temper and there he loses his temper. Passive-aggressive people are often rude. They often break with themselves. They lose their temper with all sorts of different people, right? I don't get the sense that Chris Watts is passive-aggressive. I do get the sense that he's passive, and I do get a sense that the crime is aggressive, but I don't think you can say that makes him passive-aggressive. Now, if there's time, at the end of this episode, I'm going to talk to you about passive-aggressive, what causes it, and I think that is a very interesting topic. I wonder if I shouldn't just go into it now. I think instead of talking about narcissism, we should be talking about passive-aggressive in terms of this case. Passive-aggressive is when you express negative feelings indirectly instead of openly talking about them. And this is from, I'm not sure if it's from WebMD. It could be from Very Well Mind. We know that he doesn't talk about his feelings. And then they said, so someone who uses passive aggression may feel angry, resentful, or frustrated, but they act neutral, pleasant, or even cheerful. I don't get that sense from Chris Watts. I don't get the sense that before this, that he was angry. I don't get the sense that he was resentful. I don't get the sense that he was frustrated. I'm not saying he wasn't, but I don't get the sense that this was going on with him a lot. And I'm not saying that wasn't going on with him. I'm just saying that I don't think there was a passive-aggressive thing as much with him as what is being suggested here. So the crime is passive-aggressive, but the criminal, I don't think he is. The other thing that I think is interesting to think about with the passive-aggressive thing is in the hours and hours that Chris Watts was interrogated, and bear in mind, they're trying to nail him, they're trying to rile him up, they're trying to get him to make mistakes, they're asking him over and over again what happened, and they succeed ultimately. He goes with the flow, and they ultimately get him to reveal a heck of a lot, and then they get the same thing to happen at Dodge Correctional, right? But the thing is, there are a couple of times where once he's admitted that he's killed Shanann, Tammy Lee then says, I'm not sure if we can accept this. Are you sure Shanann did this? didn't you do something to the kids? And then there's also the thing about, did you throw the kids into the tanks alive? I'm not quite quoting it correctly, but it's a section where Tammy Lee kind of hammers him further, and then he, for the first time, he actually gets a little bit aggravated, a little bit. And I think if he was passive aggressive, you'd see a lot more aggression there. You'd see a lot more aggression dealing with this situation that he's in. Bear in mind, he's now realized his life's over, and he's still not being aggressive. He's still not being angry. He's not banging his fist on the table, right? You don't get a sense that he's an aggressive fellow, generally. So I just want to look at my notes here regarding that particular aspect. So I think another really important aspect is, which is going to give you the inside loop, is what about the text to Shanann during the phone data review? If Chris Watts was truly a passive aggressive guy, you would see nastiness there. You would see, over 5 weeks, you would see passive aggressive nastiness, and you don't. You'd see him saying something like, "Leave me the hell alone. Stop messaging me, I'm busy," or whatever. And yet he's always got, even though he's deceiving her, he's got time to respond in kind of a kind way. And even when she says horrible things to him, or emotional or dramatic things to him, he doesn't really respond in a passive aggressive way. Okay? I'm not saying that the passive aggressive is absolutely irrelevant in this case. In fact, I do think it's relevant to certain people. I just don't think it's a key factor as it should be with a covert narcissist. That's the point I'm trying to make. The other thing is, if he was a passive aggressive guy, you'd imagine that he would have had arguments with Nicole Kessinger, that they would have argued. He would have, when he didn't get his way, when things weren't going well, he would have argued with her, he would have shouted at her. There would have been hot, cold things going on. And you don't really have that. You also don't have in their marriage a sense of hot, cold with him and Shanann. He just goes with the flow kind of thing. At some point, I think it was the 12th, in a text to Addie, Shanann says, "I say things to get a reaction out of him and then nothing happens." Now, if he was passive aggressive, when she said these things to trigger him, I think he would be triggered. Doesn't that make sense? Thanks very much. That's from Firefly. Thanks very much. I noticed you've still got those rainbow, is it reindeer horns? Almost said rainbow. Your grasp of this case and human criminal behavior is brilliant. Thank you for all your hard work. Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate your work on that side and your support, and thanks very much. So, with the whole thing of passive aggressive, I agree with the passive, I don't agree with the aggressive. And I don't think you can say the crime makes him aggressive. I just don't think you can do that. I don't think you can say because the crime is passive aggressive, that suddenly makes him passive aggressive, right? Okay, and that brings us to, so that's what I've said here. Yes, in terms of the crime, but no otherwise. So this to me is not in support of covert narcissism. It's kind of almost neutral. It's kind of irrelevant. And that brings us to number 5. We've got 5, 6, 7, 8. We've got 4 left. So we're halfway. The next one is envy. Envy of others and entitlement, right? So bear in mind, according to my score, we've got 2 covert narcissism traits that are definitely true. Don't know how many you've got so far. So the next one is number 5, envy of others and entitlement. Okay? Do you think, when you think of Chris Watts, do you see the envy, that he envies other people, that maybe envies the wealth of other people, or that he envies a colleague or something. So let me put it in another way. If you put Chris Watts in a picture and Shanann standing next to him, which one do you think envies others between Chris Watts and Shanann? If you put Chris Watts and Shanann in a picture together, which one do you think feels more entitled to things between the two of them? Now, once again, is there envy and entitlement going on in the crime itself? I would argue that maybe he feels entitled to his fairy tale, but I really don't think that is exceptional entitlement, because I think all of us feel we're entitled to our fairy tale. I think when you're in a relationship with somebody, you feel like this is a fairy tale and I want it and I should have it and this should happen and should be allowed to happen. I think Shanann felt entitled to her marriage going on, and I think almost everybody does. There's nothing wrong with that. But what about envy? I think what is very interesting with this thing about envy and entitlement is I feel like Nicole Kessinger envied Chris Watts, or she envied what she thought she saw. She saw this house, she saw these children, she saw this family, and I think she thought, well, I want that, right? That's what I think. I think she felt envy. That's the kind of envy we're talking about. When Chris Watts saw Nicole Kessinger, did he envy something? Well, he may have envied her freedom, but in a general sense, does he envy people? I don't get that sense from him. And the other way that envy is expressed is through social media. Do you spend a lot of your time looking at other people's social media, feeling jealous, feeling inadequate, feeling disgruntled, feeling envious, right? I don't get the feeling that he did. He wasn't on social media. He was almost too busy working to feel envious. If you also think about the MLM thing, is MLM about envy? You can go on this holiday, you can have this car, you can have a car like this, you can have a lifestyle like this. Look at this lifestyle we've got, you can have it too. I would say that multi-level marketing, the lifeblood of multi-level marketing is envy, maybe even jealousy, also greed, but especially envy. Look what I've got, you can have it. Look at this beautiful family I've got. Look at this holiday that I'm on. Look at this car that I'm driving. Look at this wonderful day that I've had. You can have it too. Just put this patch on your arm, right? So Chris Watts wasn't on social media, so I don't know where he would get envy or entitlement from. He wasn't really involved in the multi-level marketing either. If he was, you could say, wow, so he's that kind of character, but he wasn't. And then I think the other thing is, bear in mind, he was the person saying we need to downsize. He was telling Shanann, we need to downsize. We need to move out of this house. We need to move to Brighton. And he wanted to get out of his life. He wanted to get out of his marriage to essentially downsize, right? He also left his job in a way, not to downsize, but he left his job as a mechanic. I'm saying this under correction. I think he may have gotten a smaller salary, but here he is downsizing, where Shanann's job is always about, I'm now 80,000 VIP. Now I'm 120,000 VIP. Now I'm 200,000 VIP. It's all about, well, you should envy me. You can also be there, if you do that. You can also have this. I want you to feel entitled to it, kind of thing. And the opposite of MLM is downsizing, isn't it? So I don't think this one applies to Chris Watts. I don't think he's an envious fellow. Some other things that I just wrote down here was that if he felt entitled, wouldn't he want a fair trial? Wouldn't he want, like, I'm entitled to have my case heard in court. I'm entitled to defend myself at a trial. Did he want the house? Did he feel entitled to the house that they were living in, 2825 Saratoga Trail? I don't think so. I don't think he felt entitled to it. In fact, I feel like he didn't like living there. He felt like it wasn't his house. It wasn't working out. They never had any money. It was not somewhere he wanted to be. The Lexus, was it his car? I mean, was all of this about him having the Lexus? And, do you see him, when Shanann and him were sort of living together? Maybe a little bit of a tough one, because when Shanann wasn't there, he was driving the Lexus. But I get the feeling the moment, someone was saying, what was going to happen after this was all over? Well, I think he was going to get rid of the Lexus. You could argue that he was going to buy an Audi. That is a bit of an argument that maybe he felt entitled, but then he was a petrol head, so I don't know. It's difficult to say. The other thing is that he lived in the house. He could have said no. He could have put his foot down. But I just don't get that sense that he that he was spending a lot on himself. I don't really get that sense. I don't really the holiday that him and Nicole Kessinger went on wasn't a luxury 5-star hotel. It was to the sand dunes. It was camping. That's not trying to live this flamboyant life. I don't know what you guys think about that. Stephanie says, wasn't he looking up Audis? I did mention that. But in terms of having a trial, right now he's thinking about an appeal, but he's been in jail for 2 years. Only now is he thinking, hey, I'm entitled to a trial. Maybe I can get a better deal for myself. It's taken him 2 years to realize that maybe he could have gotten a better deal, right? So that is that one. And then the next one is lack of empathy. Lack of empathy. Now, I think a lot of people will sort of clap their hands. A lot of the people who've been on the covert narcissism kind of bandwagon, including the experts, will say, there's no doubt about this, that he had lack of empathy, right? And I will say, as an expert on the Chris Watts case, as someone who's written many books on the Chris Watts case, that is not that, I'd like to use an expletive here, but I think it'll be demonetized or whatever. The whole thing that you'd say that he has a lack of empathy is just absolutely crap. And this is what I mean. Did he show a lack of empathy during the sermon on the porch? Yes. Did he seem to show a lack of emotion, a lack of empathy when he was being interviewed by the CBI and FBI? Yes. When Tammy Lee said, you have not shed one tear, was that true or wasn't it true? Yes, it was true. And just after she said that, he kind of sniffed or something like that. So was he showing a lack of empathy? Absolutely. But at the same time, you've got to say, well, he had premeditated this possibly for several weeks, and he had a goal in his mind. He wanted this thing with Nicole Kessinger, right? So at the same time that you're saying he's got no feelings towards his wife and children, what about his feelings towards Nicole Kessinger? And then you say, well, I hate Nicole Kessinger, and he's got some disorder, so their relationship is nothing. But I don't think that that's the case. I think you've got to imagine it like some of the relationships you were in, especially when you're a teenager, where you can't live without somebody, where you are desperately in love with someone, and you feel like your life's not worth living. Your life is not worth living if you can't be with someone. And it's that kind of desperately being in love, right? Now, no, people don't want to think that. They don't want to grant Chris Watts his humanity or Nicole Kessinger. But that is the key to understanding this case. So this is the other side to the lack of empathy. I'm not saying that he showed empathy to his wife and children in terms of crying about it afterwards. I do think that he showed empathy towards them in terms of how he committed the crime, that he was actually trying not to commit the crime. I'm not saying that he deserves a naughty badge. I'm saying that you can't say he has no empathy. The way that he committed the crime shows that he does have some empathy. Now, you could counter argue and say, but him throwing the children into the tanks is absolutely, how can you do that? But how he may have figured it, and it's kind of the way I do as well, is when someone has died, it doesn't really matter what you do with their body, they're not going to experience it. So whether someone has died or not, whether they are launched out into space, thrown into a volcano, buried properly or not, they're not going to know about it. They're just a shell. For us, I mean, it's obviously disgraceful and all that kind of thing, but I don't know if it really has to do with empathy. And you might think that is crazy, but let me take you to the other side of the equation. So many people describe Chris Watts as kind. Now, if you think, what is empathy? Isn't it kindness, listening? To empathize with someone you sort of on the same level and you care, right? And so Chris Watts was described by Nicole Kessinger as kind. That was what attracted her to him, that he would offer to fix things that were broken, and none of her other boyfriends would do that. That was the same thing that Shanann said that attracted her to Chris Watts, was that he was so kind. That I think they'd be driving back from Myrtle Beach, and she was tired, and I think lay on his lap for hours. And I think something about he needed the bathroom and he needed the restroom or something, but he let her lie on his lap because he didn't want to disturb her. He wanted to let her sleep. And that is someone being kind and considerate, empathetic, right? That's just one example, but there are many others. In that video that Plunder put up, where Shanann is doing a video and saying, Chris must bring me my wine. At the same time, he's doing her laundry. He's doing the laundry. And he does bring her wine. He's being empathetic. The other thing is that he was described as a good listener. I get the feeling that Shanann also thought of him as a good listener. But Nicole Kessinger described him as a good listener. What is a good listener other than someone who's empathetic, someone who empathizes, someone who listens? And what was quite interesting with Chris Watts and Nicole Kessinger was he felt listened to through her as well, which is quite interesting, because you could say, is Shanann an empathizing person? Did Chris Watts find Shanann to be empathizing? If she was saying, he'll do whatever I say kind of thing. I think Shanann dominated the relationship, but I think there was a point where it wasn't so good for him anymore. So, and that doesn't make it her fault. He needed to say, this isn't good for me, and she needed to respect that, but it's going to take a while to get out of those grooves of behavior. The other thing that I think shows that he doesn't lack empathy is that he was a considerate lover. He was a considerate lover. I got the impression from Shanann that he fell in line with what she wanted. So if she took a shower, that was a message, he knew what it was. You got the same sense from Nicole Kessinger, who said that, in those quite embarrassing texts sent to Charlotte, she sort of says that he was quite a considerate lover. It could be a bit more graphic, but I think you know what I'm talking about. And I think that is another way that you express that you care about someone, is how you make love to them. Are you selfish, or do you listen? Are you selfish, or do you give? Are you selfish, or do you sort of respond and get a sense of what's going on with the other person. I got a sense that there was a real sexual connection with Kissinger, but also like a psychic connection, a real connection where he felt listened to, she felt listened to, and they felt, cared for by one another. Of course, all of that, and then you put the crime next to it, it invalidates all of it, doesn't it? The other thing just about empathy is Shanann herself described him as a good father and husband. You could say that you could discount all of that as social media posturing, that she was just blustering for the sake of her thrivers. But I think other people said that as well. Other people like the LIVESTREAM said they got along really well. The Thayers said that. And I think even Eddie said that, and Casimir said that, that they got along really well, that they were a really good couple, and that he was a good father and husband. And Shanann herself said that. I think that's the most important. Her parents said the same thing about him. Why would you say he's a good father and husband if he was someone who lacked empathy all along? Why would you say that? Now, you could easily say, well, I don't believe it. I don't believe Shanann. I don't believe that was the case, but it certainly looked like that. In social media, you can see him blowing on Bella's fingernails, I think, to dry them. He cuts their hair, he dresses them, he packs their lunch. The impression you get is that he is a kind, present, loving father, husband, all those kinds of things. And so if you make that case, and I think you can make that case, then you say, okay, I don't understand why any of this happened if he was this good guy. Because that eventually disconnected and it got all transferred onto somebody else. Plus there was the debt situation, plus there was this desperately being in love with someone, plus the pregnancy. I mean, you need a little bit of time to make all of those points in a proper way, but once you do, you can see what we're talking about. And then, like I said previously, I know it's a crazy point to make, where you say, well, how can someone with empathy try to avoid murder? And how can you say there's empathy in the murder? How can you say that? Amy Eck, this has been interesting. Thank you. Thank you for, I'm glad that it's interesting. I hope I'm reaching some people. I think that he tried to avoid the murder, and maybe not in the nicest way. And I think he was a doofus to get Shanann pregnant and then pull out of it in the way that he did. But, the other side of it is the Patrick Frazee crime is horrific by comparison. It's absolutely horrific. And when you compare that to Chris Watts, you kind of get the sense of, do you want to talk about a psychopath? Do you want to talk about a sociopath or a narcissist? Well, then go and head on to the Patrick Frazee case. I don't like those terms anyway, but if you really want to talk about them, go to the Patrick Frazee case. By comparison, I do believe that the way that the children were murdered was that he intended to overdose them, that they would die of an overdose, and if they didn't die of an overdose, that when they were unconscious, they would be asphyxiated. That is my belief. And that is based on the idea of that he didn't want to cause them any pain. So I do want you to get rid of you permanently, but I don't want to hurt you. I don't mean you any, not harm. I mean, because, I don't want you to suffer. I've decided to do this, but I don't want to hurt you. It's going to hurt me to hurt you, and I want to get rid of you, but I want to do it in a painless way. Deborah Booth, great analysis. Thank you very much, Deborah. Does that make sense what I'm saying? I'm not saying that it makes sense. I'm not saying that a reasonable person would do this. I'm saying within the criminal psychology, this is what happened. Can you see that? That's what I'm really saying. So I'm saying, I think there's a considerable body of evidence showing that Chris Watts was an empathetic guy. And the crime itself, even the crime itself, there's some empathy going on there as well. And I'm going to take it even further, and this might upset some people, if I say, didn't he commit the crime out of empathy for Nicole Kessinger? What I mean by that is, doesn't she want me to get rid of my family, meaning get divorced? Doesn't she need me to get divorced yesterday? So I'm going to get divorced yesterday, right? So part of why he's doing what he's doing is out of empathy. It's obviously very crooked, very misconstrued, not what, if he'd asked Nicole Kessinger, is this what you want me to do? She would have said, no, absolutely not. But in a different way, do you want me to get rid of my family so that I can be with you? Yes. Divorce your family, divorce your wife. I want to be with you. I want to be number one in your life. And so do you get what I'm saying? So part of what he was doing, I think, was out of empathy. So can you see how empathy doesn't really work when you think about it? But you've got to think about it logically about someone was saying, I think the comment was hidden, that it's when your parents spank you, and let's see if I can find it. And they say it's going to hurt me as much as it's going to, or something like that. But it is the same kind of principle that, a parent hitting a child is going to hurt the parent. It's going to, and I've certainly felt it with Timmy. I felt there are times where he's very naughty, and, people have said, you've got to discipline him, that's not right. And I feel like, wow, and I know about that whole thing. You shouldn't hit an animal, but you certainly got to discipline them. And that's the question. How do you discipline an animal? Because they don't know what it's about. Do you give them a time out? Do you shout at them? What is going to work? And so, that whole subject on its own, I think, is just very fraught. Because I don't even know the answer to that. But what I can tell you is that whole thing about, I think the best way of putting it is, in a human sense, is if you have an animal that you love, like a pet, but for its own benefit, obviously your benefit as well, you need to put it down. I'm talking about if it's really old, if the vet has said, whatever, he's got cancer or something, then you're going to do something, but you don't want to put him through any more pain than he needs to go through. It's a horrible subject to go into, but can you see what I'm getting at? There's empathy there, even though what is happening isn't very nice, right? That's what I'm trying to communicate in terms of Chris Watts. Although it's not if you really hate Chris Watts, it's not something you really want to hear, that he does actually have empathy. Everyone wants to believe that he doesn't. But this is what I think makes him quite an unusual animal in the crime sense. So I don't think this one applies to him, a lack of empathy. So he's a covert narcissist because he lacks empathy. I don't think it applies. And maybe after I've explained this to you, you've changed your mind on it. Have you? You can let us know in the comments. So we've got two left. The next one is number 7. And this one I think does apply, which is a tendency to step in and help others. Now, this is, this is a covert narcissist, and now he has quite a positive trait. So, someone said, Nick has a tendency to step in and help others. He's a covert narcissist, horrible. I would be like, wow, I think that's quite a good trait to have, to be helpful. And I do think no matter what I'm doing, if I'm in the middle of something, if I get a request from a patron or something, for my assistance, obviously it's to do with my work, I do try and drop everything and help people. A little bit different because I'm I guess I'm helping myself in a way. But if it's a situation where it's neutral, someone is struggling to get their dogs into the car, would you step in and help them? I would. Does that make you a horrible person? So Chris Watts, I think, was giving mechanical advice on Sunday night, I think, was it Eddie's husband? And he was quite helpful to Nicole Kessinger, as I say, but I mean, maybe there's a thing going on there. But you kind of get I think the Lindstrom said that when Shanann's folks moved in with them for 15 months, she said something like, you need to go to North Carolina and drive their stuff down. And that's what he did. And no complaint. And, you've got to really hear it from the Lindstroms, but that does give you the sense of, wow, he is a pretty helpful guy, no resentment. He just, that's who he is. So, mechanical advice, you got the idea that he would do that as well, also from the Lindstroms. Again, he's not on social media doing that. He's not on multi-level marketing. Not like, I'm helping you live your best life. That was the way Shanann saw it. But so in this sense, I think it is part of the covert narcissism thing. But I think it's a bit unfair to say, well, someone who's helpful is a covert narcissist, and that's a bad thing. But anyway, let's put it on the list. And so at the moment, I've got. I think the blue ones are the neutral ones. So I've got 2 that are neutral. That's my count. 2 that are neutral, and I've got 2 that are positive for the negative traits. So the one is reserved or self-effacing, so that might be some kind of covert, stealthy killer, and the tendency to put themselves down. Maybe that would make him, frustrated and angry, and that's number 2. But none of the others really come up. So, and that brings us to the 8th thing. I'm just not quite sure what the original thing is here. I'm not sure if there are 8 traits of a covert narcissist, but I've added an 8th one. I've basically said this. I've said that the crime itself was covert, and the personality of the crime isn't the same as the personality of the criminal. It's a little bit different. So I agree that the crime itself is covert. There's no evidence anywhere. There's no, or very little evidence. Sort of no witnesses. He acted alone. It's all very covert, right? So that part I agree with. If you're taking that word covert narcissism, the crime itself was very covert, and Chris Watts, as an introvert, is a quiet, secretive individual, reserved individual. But if you take the word narcissism, wanting a better life with someone he genuinely loved, that I agree with is narcissism. But isn't that healthy narcissism, to want a better life for yourself? Was there narcissism in his health adventure, in the fitness? And I would argue no, that is just normal narcissism. So I think when you're talking about narcissism that is unhealthy, it is where there's a big ego involved, where there's perhaps a lot of passive aggressive activity going on, where there's a lot of entitlement, a lot of vanity, a lot of it being about your appearance. And I think something that did happen with Chris Watts is his narcissism picked up from where it was, but that doesn't, I think, make him a narcissist. I think if he'd been aware of his looks his entire life, a fitness fanatic his entire life, having affairs his entire life, that would make him narcissistic. Instead, I think the problem we're dealing with here that is not being recognized is low self-esteem. That he had low self-esteem and that his self-esteem was somehow elevating, and that sort of allowed him to feel like, well, I really want this. I can't really allow this not to happen. Tiffany Cherie, hi Nick. Timmy is sort of like, why are you still here, Timmy? Timmy, what's going on? Timmy, hey? Timmy, what's going on? Huh? Okay. I think that's about it, guys. We've been on for an hour and 40 minutes. Just want to look at some of the other things I said here. The body is disposed of post-mortem. That's to do with a lack of empathy. So I'm not really going to take it further than that. But basically, I'm basically saying that I don't think the covert narcissism thing works. I do think introversion works, and you can talk about passive-aggressive to some extent. One of the reasons for being passive-aggressive is how you're raised. Thanks very much to Debbie McClellan for another live. Thanks very much. Love your books on this case. Appreciate that. I just want to touch on something regarding the passive-aggressive side, and then we'll be done. And this is to do with the causes, right? This is from Very Well Mind, okay? I think this is so interesting because this applies to us in our lives. You might well be dealing with a passive-aggressive person in your environment, and how do you cope with that? So the causes of passive-aggressive people, this is from Very Well Mind. They talk about it can have grave consequences to relationships between people in families, romance, in the workplace. It's a very destructive behavior, but why is it so common? And then it talks about the causes of it. So the first cause is upbringing. So the first thing is that it may stem from being raised in an environment where the direct expression of emotions was discouraged or not allowed. Right? So what can cause passive aggressiveness in people is where you grew up in a family where you couldn't really express your emotions the way that you wanted to. It was discouraged or not allowed. Now, this could be because of religious things, or, in the Chris Watts case, it could be because his father was someone who wasn't very emotional or emotionally expressive. So he may not have learned that in terms of his father, right? I do want to say that Chris Watts is a passive guy, but the crime that he committed was ultra-aggressive. Murder is ultra-aggressive. So there is a passive-aggressive element in this case, but I don't think you can say Chris Watts is a passive-aggressive person. Does that make sense? Nevertheless, I think we need to look at this incredible passivity and then this incredible aggressiveness at the end of the story. And I think what we're talking about is he was too passive, he was too repressed, he was too crushed in, to the extent that that made him very aggressive in how he dealt with, his situation. I think someone else gave me something. Broken dishes. Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity for intelligent and rational conversation. Pleasure. I love your avatar there. It's certainly appropriate for true crime. So that's one of them. People feel that they cannot express their real feelings more openly, and so they find other ways to passively channel their anger or frustration. Okay, So then there's another one, situational characteristics. I'm not really going to go into that, where situation can have an influence on passive-aggressive behavior. In the Chris Watts case, you could maybe argue that the MLM created a situational situation. In other words, we've got to pretend to everyone that everything's great. So I've got to be passive in terms of my frustrations. I've got to be passive in terms of what I'm really worried about. I've got to be passive in terms of what I really want to talk about. I've got to be passive in terms of, and this almost applies to Shanann as much as Chris Watts. Things aren't going very well in my marriage. Things aren't going very well with my health. Things aren't going very well with this pregnancy. Things aren't going very well, but I've got to put on a happy face, right? I've got to be like the Joker, and that's not how I'm feeling. I'm crying inside, but I've got to do this because of MLM. Otherwise, I'm not going to sell things. I'm not going to make a living, right? And so what that is doing is making you passive in the one sense, but also aggressive, right? Rachel Krapinski, thanks very much. I like the fox, a nice little cartoon there. Thanks very much. And so that brings us to taking the easy road. So one of the causes of being passive aggressive, and I must say, I think I can apply this to myself as well, is I know that I'm capable of, in certain situations, whether it's with family members or whatever, I also go with the flow to some extent. And you think, what is wrong with that? What's wrong with going with the flow? You're not being confrontational. You're not causing drama. You're not causing conflict. You're not fighting. The problem is that when you go with the flow, there's a point where you are crossing a line where you're doing something you really don't want to do, but then you do it for someone else's sake. Then you do it again. Then you do it again. Then you do it again. Then when you don't do it, the other person, first of all, can't understand, why am I not getting my way? And you feel this incredible resentment, like, I've given up so much for you. I've let you have your way so many times, and you don't appreciate it at all. Okay, Half Rutter says, thank you, Half Rutter. I think that's another donation from you. Really appreciate that. But can you see what I'm getting at? So we know that this is an absolute defining quality for Chris Watts, this go with the flow thing. So I think if you want to label him, and I prefer that you don't, but I think the passive aggressive thing is a bit closer to him than covert narcissist. But I think the best label, if you want to use a label, I prefer not to use a label. Let's get to know these people as people, get to know the dynamics, and that way we're going to understand what happened. Labels make us lazy. Labels stop us from trying to figure people out. And the other thing with labels is we start applying them to people around us that we don't agree with. Then we think we know them. And also people apply those labels to us, and that's not who we are. We are you a label? Are you your name? Or are you beyond that? And also, can you transcend your own label? Of course you can. You can be whoever you want to be. Stacy says, I love this chat. I don't have to worry one bit. Okay. Labels limit. Yes, please. Everyone who's a True Crime Rocket Science patron or fan, take it easy on the labels. Labels don't help with true crime. Stephanie says, how can I find Patreon? It's www.patreon.com/TCRS. But Stephanie will probably help you out with that if you're struggling. So anyway, taking the easy road, this is from Very Well Mind. They talk about being assertive and emotionally open is not always easy. So in other words, this is a message to Chris Watts, but also to people who are yes men and go with the flow people. Being assertive is where you say, hold on, that doesn't suit me. I don't want that done that way. No, I don't want that. I want that. Now, you can be a real, you know what, if you're doing that constantly. But there's some occasions where it's important to stand up and say, you know what, this isn't going to work for me. And I feel in a way, this is going to be a silly example, I kind of went with the flow where I live in a complex and they wanted me to put the box of my air conditioner somewhere, and I put it somewhere. Now it's picking up all the fumes of where the garbage is left and the drain. And I just never thought about that. I sort of just said, look, I don't want to be a problem. I'm going to do what they need me to do. So I'll just put the aircon wherever they want it. So I put it where they want it, kind of. And now I've got the problem of bacteria that is being blown over my bedroom at night. And now, because I didn't think about that. And it's a silly example, but it's a case of sometimes you've got to be assertive. And I'm just a little bit upset that the folks who put the aircon in didn't really mention that to me. Timmy's like, when is this going to be over? Timmy, when's it going to be over? Timmy? Cute little face. Can you see him? Sorry, I think the camera went a bit off there. So just to end off, when standing up for yourself is difficult or even scary, passive aggression might seem like an easier way to deal with your emotions without having to confront the source of your anger. So that's often how passive aggressiveness manifests, is when you stand up for yourself, you kind of need to be patient. You need to do it with love and with grace, but you might feel quite angry and resentful, and those feelings might feel really valid, but you've kind of got to think, you know what, standing up for myself is healthy, but I also need to do it in a way that is healthy. So if somebody else is the recipient of you standing up for yourself, Stephanie, thank you very much. Shout out to Stacy P and Firefly 2. Thanks, guys. Thanks for your support. Thanks for your help on that side. Do you get what I'm saying? Standing up for, so one of the lessons I think we need to learn from the Chris Watts case is Chris Watts did the right thing, standing up for himself, meaning the idea that that I don't want this, but he applied it in a horrible, terrible, absolutely catastrophic way. And so what we should learn from this is, how do you stand up for yourself? Well, one thing is stand up for yourself often in things that are somewhat important to you and very important to you, but do it in a way that's not transactional. So you don't make a deal to get your way. You make it in a reasonable way. It's not if this, then that. You say, well, look, this is who I am, and this is quite important to me, and you try and do it in a way that, does that make sense? In other words, you've got to not go with the flow as much. You're prepared to stand up for yourself, but stand up for yourself in a way that's not aggressive, not confrontational, but nevertheless assertive. And if someone pushes you back and say, why are you whatever, you need to be able to respond in a way that doesn't escalate it. So that you say, well, can you just think about it? And that brings us to the last point. And that is, Timmy, can I just finish? How to cope with passive aggressive people. Timmy, can I finish? Hey? Can I finish? Can you see him? Lovely little face, eh? Okay. So I'm about to finish up here. How do you cope with a passive-aggressive person? When you're confronted by a friend who's passive-aggressive, and the signs of it are sulking, backhanded compliments, procrastination, withdrawal, refusing to communicate. They're all signs of passive-aggressive. I think another one is where you get threatened by someone. They'll say, if you ask for something, then they threaten you to get you to back down. It won't be like a violent threat, just something that you might. Natalie Rice, okay. I must say, I'm sorry that I haven't been able to respond to a lot more of your comments. I've just been trying to rush through this live. I see we're almost at 2 hours. Sagiti Nona, he's so darn cute. Sure, it definitely is. Ivy's pretty. Someone wants to know how I got Ivy. Timmy is a cutie. Let me just finish with how to cope. When the other person begins acting in such a way, this is from Very Well Mind, try to keep your anger in check. So that's the first thing. Don't get angry. Then point out the other person's feelings in a way that's non-judgmental. So this is when someone else is being passive-aggressive. Point out their feelings. So, wow, aren't you being unreasonable? You seem to be upset or whatever. If you're dealing with a child who's clearly upset about, say, doing chores, so the child is being passive-aggressive, and children can be, then you can say something like this. You seem to be angry at me for asking you to clean your room, right? Now, what I find really interesting about this is with a passive-aggressive person, you can't expect an instant result. You can expect to trigger them. So what you've got, kind of got to do is sow the seed in their minds. Bear in mind, passive-aggressive people are going to revert to being passive. Sow the seed in their minds, then leave it, walk away, and let them try and resolve it. If they don't resolve it, do it again. So what they say is, for example, with a child, dealing with a child that's upset about cleaning his room, you seem to be angry at me for asking you, and then let the child resolve that. Don't lead him to the water and expect him to drink. Lead him a little bit of the way to the water, and then, does that make sense? And then they say, this is such a great point from Very Well Mind. The reality is that people usually deny their anger anyway. So if you confront a passive-aggressive person, they're going to say, I'm not angry. I'm not upset, right? And then they say it's a good idea to step back and give them time to work through those feelings. So you just need to stop them and say, hey, what's going on here? And then let them resolve it. So it's obviously a tricky thing to do. Stephanie says, interesting true crime and love for animals, great bunch. Amy Eck, my husband can be very passive-aggressive in a sweet and subtle way. That's a nice way of putting it. Can you think of any examples there, Amy? Samantha, right, all that material stuff will never make you happy. Living over your means, constantly worried and stressed about dollars. So I'm going to end off now. I think we're at 157, an hour, 57 minutes. Something that I just want to talk about very quickly that I'm quite excited about. There have been some bonus episodes on Patreon on the John Benet Ramsey case. One of the bonus episodes I did was dealing with where did the idea, there it is. Can you read that? Where did the idea for the ransom note come from, the Ramsey ransom note? And I think that is such a fascinating thought. I don't mean the Ramseys were presented with a scenario that John Benet had died. I mean, here's a situation, I'm going to write a ransom note. I'm going to write something down. Where did that idea come from? And I just think that that is something that you never hear about, spoken about in any of the true crime discussions on John Benet Ramsey. And I think it's just a fascinating alley to go down. So the patrons will, the folks on Patreon will know what I'm talking about, but we go into a lot of detail about that kind of thing. You know, where did the ransom note come from, the idea for it, and so on. And at the moment, I'm narrating the very first book that I wrote in the series, and at the same time, thoughts and ideas that have obviously occurred to me long after that. I'm sort of providing a little bit of background, a little bit of insight into that, which I think just makes the whole thing quite interesting, quite fascinating. So, Tiffany Cherie, thank you very much. bump, fist bump. Okay, thank you very much. That's pretty cool. Thanks very much. 12-step woman, high five. Broken dishes. Okay. Okay, guys, I'm going to say goodbye to you. This is, I think, the longest live I've done so far. I hope I'm doing them better. I'm sorry for being 5 minutes late. Just didn't really have any technical glitches. Just didn't quite get started on time. Yvonne Robinson, brilliant chat tonight. So enjoyed it. I'm glad you've enjoyed it. Just must find someone to have a conversation with. This is such a strange medium to this old gal. Okay, well, I'm sure Yvonne, where are you in the world? Maybe someone in your neck of the woods can message you and chat to you. Jordan Lever, love you, Nick from the United States. Debbie McClellan, excellent. Thanks, guys. Okay, Mo Beans, New Jersey, take care. Ciao. Thanks, Stephanie. Thank you to everybody. It's 11 o'clock at night here, so I'm going to be finding a pillow. So is Timmy. Timmy's on this side now. But I'll probably be back next week for another live. I'm open at this point to suggestions from you guys. Thanks, Stephanie. Thanks, Loris. Thanks, Anne. Thanks, Nurse Bev. Thanks, Elaine. Yvonne is from Bromley, UK. So anyone in that area, you've got someone to talk to. Victoria, have a great rest of your weekend. Teresa Moore, thanks. Cheers, guys. Ciao.